Welcome to the Tech Space Pod, where we cut through the noise to spotlight the European founders, operators, and investors who are building the future, and the teams that are shaping tech in Berlin, London, and beyond. Each episode brings sharp insight from our members and wider network, covering everything from frontier tech and funding to team culture and scaling strategy. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Jane Wakefield, your host, and I'm delighted to say that I'm here with JooBee Yeow, a people leader. The old-fashioned phrase is HR leader. Which do you prefer?
I do not mind, because a name is a rose by any name.
Quite right indeed. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so excited, Jane.
Now look, the first thing I'm going to talk about is you, and I'm going to get quite personal because I was reading your LinkedIn profile and I spotted that you called yourself a proud introvert. And I love that phrase because I'm a big fan of the TED Talk by Susan Cain that talks about the power of introversy and the way that we can kind of use people that are very different personality traits and everybody will feed into a company. We don't all need to be extroverts. So tell me a bit about why you've labelled yourself like that.
Susan is my absolute hero. And I was really glad when she did her TED Talk, and it brought so much visibility to what an introvert means. Because sometimes the assumption is introverts are awkward, they don't enjoy crowd, or they are shy. Actually, those characteristics are not true. The key thing being an introvert is how do you recharge so that you can be your best self. So, for example, people do say that they don't realize that I'm an introvert when I socialize or when I do what I do, because I had time to recharge. But when I recharge, I do not talk to anyone. I remember one example. I actually didn't leave my flat for 8 days alone, because it was Christmas time, nobody needs me, partner was at home, so I had time to recharge. And the only reason it was 8 days and probably not 10 or 14 days is because Deliveroo couldn't find my flat. So I have to go out of my flat to find them. But after that, I came back, energized, recharged, and being able to be my best self.
I mean, that's a really interesting point you make, because we should all perhaps recharge by doing something like that. And the other thing that sort of somebody that's an introvert brings as a special skill is they're very, very good at listening, which I imagine is a very handy skill if you're in HR, but also if you're a founder. And we were talking before about how, founders again have to sort of play this role of being very confident and being very out there. But, there's going to be as many personality types amongst the founding community as there is in any other walk of life, from people that are just inventors and aren't very good with people, all the way through to those that have everything. So what's your advice to founders when it comes to sort of dealing with their own personalities, I guess?
So for so many years, we expect leaders to be charismatic, to be, everything that we watch in, Hollywood movies. And that puts an expectation for leaders and therefore founder that they need to be like that. So number one, to recognize that there's a difference. And number two, play to your strength. So I was having a conversation with a founder recently, and he says, JooBee, I can't do that. I can't do that at all hand. I can't be charismatic. That's not me. I'm like, don't be you. Don't be not you then. What are you good at? And he said, I love reading. I love reflecting on, what we have achieved, and I love to write. I was like, write it. Write a newsletter for your employees every month, updates your thoughts. The key is people want to know you. They want to know what you think. You can communicate it in all hand, or you can communicate it in any medium that can achieve the same outcome.
I mean, that's great advice. And actually that leads me on to sort of talking more about the industry that you're in. HR, being able to offer that kind of advice is invaluable, but often that's not seen as the role of HR, is it? The role of HR is seen as, a bit separate and somebody you come to later in your journey. Yeah. You've used the word reactive which I guess means they should be more proactive. So talk me through a little bit about how you think HR departments can be more at the heart of businesses.
So if we were to look at what HR typically do, sometimes we think, okay, we lead a function, we lead the HR function, we need to deliver on HR stuff. But in startups, so I'll give a very tangible example. So HR leaders, many times they'll say to me that, we don't have strategy. I can't craft my strategy because our business doesn't have one. In startup, that is quite normal because your founder might be their only job. It might be their third job in their life. So somebody need to coach them. Somebody need to facilitate that. Who in the exec team has the skill to coach and facilitate? The role of a HR leader naturally comes with that skill anyway. So we actually have the skill, we have the role to be in a position to actually facilitate, guide, and coach our founder in terms of business strategy. The next question will always be, but JooBee, I don't know anything about business. You might not know it now, but that's okay. The key skill is to help your founder reflect, think, prioritize, start there. And as you're doing that, you start to get to know the business. So that's where we can be more proactive and recognize that our role is beyond executing on anything that is people or HR initiative, but actually be part of the business as a whole.
And that's really important because whenever you talk to companies, they will always say that at its heart is the people.
Yes.
It's all about the people.
Yep.
And yet the department that are all about the people are often not making or helping make those sort of strategic decisions. Why do you think that has been historically the case? And do you think that's changing now?
So what will normally happen at the exec table is you have leaders from different departments, and everyone will think I'm responsible for marketing, for sales, for tech, and therefore HR. So if you look at the Venn diagram, it becomes like this, rather than an overlap of all of the components. And that is really, really core, not just for HR, because if we think about this, take a very real example. During exec meeting, when we talk about people stuff, other execs are probably replying to Slack messages. And when other execs are talking about sales projection, we probably zone out. And that shouldn't be the case. If we see that all the functions are overlapping and therefore there's only one goal, that is the business, people are not separated to the business. It needs to be an overlap.
And actually in a startup that should be kind of easier than in a big corporation where there's hundreds and hundreds of people in each department. And it does make total sense, doesn't it, that everybody sort of knows what every other department is doing. And sometimes when someone joins a job, they'll kind of do a bit of that, won't they, a bit of shadowing around and learn the business. But then that dies off. Would you advocate that we kind of keep that going and that we all sort of learn what other parts of the business are doing sort of all the time?
So if we look at startup's journey, that's about 3 broad stages. The first one is exactly what you just described, where everybody is involved in everything. You're still small. But when the startup found its product market fit, what will normally happen is you get funding to scale. And when you scale, what happens is you start to create specialism. So your different department, and the difference between, because when you were saying that, I was like, yes, there's one thing about startup that's different that causes this is speed. As quickly as you can, you need to scale. So you run fast in your own direction when that happens. So you start to become silo. Even though you're small, you start to become silo because you're running so fast. But back to your point, Jane, yes, we must continue to be overlapping, be interested in what other department is doing, because if not, we are making decisions in silo.
So what would your sort of advice be to people that work in HR in order to sort of make all the things that you've just described become a daily reality for them? Because it's easy to talk about it, isn't it? But it's not always as easy to implement it.
And also it can feel overwhelming because you're like, I'm already so busy with my stuff.
Yeah.
I need to learn about everything else in the business. One thing that I will always say is start simple. It starts with the mindset. Instead of looking at ourselves as HR leader or any exec looking at themselves as a functional leader, see themselves as business leader. If you are at the table, the exec table, you are responsible for the business. So start with the first mindset shift first. What does the business need to achieve? And how can our function enable that?
That's really good advice, yeah. And obviously at the moment there's an awful lot of pressures on businesses. And that filters down to HR in terms of hiring and firing. Do you see that kind of pressure easing, and how do you cope with that when we're in such sort of turbulent economic times?
Yeah. So speaking of startup ecosystem, if we look at past many years, funding was flowing, and the focus was simple: grow at all costs. However, now, as you mentioned, with the economic uncertainty, AI disruption, tighter funding, the reality that startup is facing is very, very different to what we're used to. And that means that startup need to really rally the whole organization as a whole to adapt, to survive, and to stay on that path of growth. And therefore, what is expected of HR? Previously, when funding was flowing, our core role very much was in hiring, benefits, onboarding. It's very much functional level work that we focus on. And that was probably fine at that time, but now we need to be able to rally the business, as I mentioned.
Yeah, so basically, are you saying that, that you have to find a happy medium between the two? That
the shift that's coming, actually, we can handle it. It's not new, it's just that we haven't flexed that muscle because of the good times.
Yeah, I see. That makes sense, yeah. You mentioned two things in what you were saying to me, and I want to draw a bit more out about them. The first was benefits. It feels to me that we've gone from a world where you went along to a job and you were told what the job would entail, and then you just said yes or no, to a world where you now sort of say, well, I want this, and I want that, and I want the other. Is that a fair kind of assessment of things? And is that shift good, that we're giving a bit more power to the employees even before they've got the job?
That is not a problem at the moment in startup. So what's happening in startup is they need to achieve more with less. Very, very tight squeeze. And the difference is you literally may not exist in 2 years' time versus other business where they might be able to ride the wave. They might not have more profit, they might not grow revenue, but they are sustainable. Startup doesn't. If you don't get that right, you're not getting the next round of funding, and that's the end. And that's happening the last 2 years in startup. And HR should be able to help the business, but they are not at the moment, and founders are very frustrated. So I want to find a way to motivate HR to start thinking from the business perspective, or else they will always be against what the business need to achieve, and the business now is very nervous that they might not make it.
So you've laid out the sort of intent, which is to think more from a business perspective, but what are the sort of steps to getting there?
Yes. So if we go, what HR leaders need to do now is really understand the business. Start small. I mean, it can be daunting. You might feel like, oh my God, do I need to do a whole MBA for this? Start small. Start this week. Do one small thing. It could be sitting in your product or sales meeting. Listen to what your leaders are worried about. Don't just filter out for HR things that you want to hear, but actually listen to what's the problem when it comes to building product in our business, or what's the problem that we are not generating more revenue. What are they concerned about? With that in mind, when you start looking at what we need to do for our people, you are grounded by what the business need. So that could be one. The other one could be I guess it ties back to the first one. Look at what you're doing right now in HR, the projects, the initiative. How is it aligned to what the business need? Ask the hard question. If it doesn't, then it's not delivering value. Yesterday I had a conversation with a HR leader, and it was really, really sweet. She just attended my bootcamp a couple of weeks ago. And she said, JooBee, what I realized was last year I was so proud of one HR project that I did. So proud because it was so cool. Connected to nothing in the business.
Cool.
The self-awareness, I love it. But she said, recently, after the bootcamp, I went back to the business. I went to my FP&A guy, she said, and I asked for the statements. I tried to understand it. And she said, I start to see where the challenges are in different teams in terms of the different, let's say, revenue team. She said, I went to the head of and go, your team is underperforming. He's like, you're always telling me that. But let me show you the numbers. These people are not bringing in revenue in the past 6 months. This is a business problem. And he started listening, and they started to have conversation. So when we're able to understand the business better, the initiative, so she wanted to send the manager for manager training previously. She recommended to the VP what he needed to do with this team. And she said for the past 12 months, they were not listening to her. The initiative that she recommended again recently is the same initiative, but because the conversation is anchored in the business need, she said, now I am heard.
Fascinating. Now I want to talk about the boot camp, but before we get onto that, another thing that you mentioned was, which is a scary thought, isn't it, that some of these startup businesses just won't exist in 2 years, and some of that will be down to the sort of threat of AI. So let's talk briefly about AI, both in terms of the general threat to jobs, but also in terms of HR itself, whether it's bringing benefits to that. So should we start with a sort of wider question?
Wider question of AI being a threat to
jobs. I mean, we hear this all the time, don't we? That that half the jobs that we do now aren't going to exist in a few years' time. Do you subscribe to that theory?
I believe that is true because we've seen that throughout. Every time when there is a technological disruption. But the beauty of it is new jobs will also be created that we never or cannot even imagine right now. So the key is, so in startup, if we were to look at company level, how agile are we to adapt to change? Then how agile are our people to adapt to change? And that involves, so looking at the business, what do we need? What do we need then usually is tied back to how are we going to enable that through our people? So what are the capabilities needed? The job might change, and we need to enable our people to be able to grow the skill towards what's needed. And that is the key, and that is evolution.
So, and then specifically in the world of HR, we're seeing again AI disrupting industries, but in a good way, bringing more efficiencies, freeing up people to do more things. Is that the case in HR too?
It should, yes, because it cuts across everything we do. So it is a yes. If we go, are we actively, two parts. So with HR, we're not just leading our function, we're enabling the business. So many HR leaders are thinking, how can I enable my function? I would say start with the business again, because your business need to achieve whatever goal that they need to. And if we look at startup, one of it is we need to, with funding being a little bit more tighter, we cannot hire the way we used to. So which means the workload remain the same if we want to grow, but we have less funding to hire more people to do the work. And that is where you go, if the business need to achieve this goal and we can't hire people to do the work, how can we leverage technology, and in this case AI, to achieve the same goal and even better, more than what we think we could. So it's not just about cutting away operational work and being more efficient, it's also the value that we can deliver, not just in terms of, I would say, quantity, but quality. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense. Now let's talk about your journey, because
Yeah.
you started off in HR departments
Yeah.
and now you're coaching HR leaders.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of led to that change, and tell me a bit about kind of both sides of the coin.
Both sides of the coin. So I used to work in startup, where I joined startup when they are ready to build to scale. I came from a system engineering background, so I love that part, because how do you enable the system? And I work closely with founder exec team, and of course, leading my own team. I went independent 4 years ago. So when I went independent, I thought I will continue to do the same, but from the other side, coaching founders, their team and their business to make that transition. HR was always my community, my people. So I wanted to serve them in different way, through my newsletter, through my blog, through content to help them do what they do. But I also keep getting requests on, can you coach me? Do you have a boot camp to help HR step up, either be more strategic or do what you do? So I actually had, about 12 months ago, have my reflection moment as an introvert every few quarters, and I go, helping founders solve business problem is rewarding, but enabling HR leader to solve that business problem feels more personal, because I've always been very proud when the team that I lead, I see them grow into their full potential and start leading their own team and become the business leader that they aspire to. And I haven't done that since I left a full-time role. So I thought, could I, and the beautiful thing about running your own business is you have the choice, could I continue to deliver value for business, but also combine doing work that feed my soul? So I decided to build HR leadership bootcamp for HR leaders, and I'm going to be launching a community for them as well soon.
Exciting stuff. Now, what's involved in a boot camp? It sounds quite scary.
It is, and it's intentionally called the bootcamp because it is intense. And even in my website, the communication is expect pain.
Oh gosh.
Because bootcamp is an intervention. So in startup, what we don't have is time. And how can I help the HR leaders step up as quickly as possible? The bootcamp is only 4 days, and across 5 weeks of support, but 4 days. And in the last bootcamp, every of the HR leader at the end of the day said, my brain hurts, but in a good way. Why? Because number one, the bootcamp helps you first to, it challenges our perspective of what HR leadership is. What is our accountability and what is the change in our role? And it will then start to cover, how do you connect what HR do to the business? I also, because I specialize in startup, is very context specific. What does your startup need to survive across their growth journey? And that is the focus of the bootcamp. I am terrible at talking about my own product. I'm so sorry.
No, it sounds great, and I love the idea that people come out and say their brains hurt. I mean, that we talked about TED at the beginning. That's what everyone always says about TED. So many talks that by the time you end, your brain is exhausted. So it sounds brilliant. You mentioned as well that you train founders, and I wonder if you've noticed anything, like if you were to offer tips to founders based on the training that you've done, and specifically about how you become more people-orientated or think in a more kind of human way about your teams, what would your sort of top 3 tips be?
So how can founder think about their people more and be more
people-centric, I suppose. As we said earlier, that everyone talks a good talk, don't they? They say people are the most important thing, but actually, for a founder, profit, keeping the business going, developing the product, finding customers, sometimes those things overtake their teams. So to bring it back to thinking about their workforce, what would your tips be?
So what I've noticed founders, there's a slight difference between, let's say, founders in startup than, let's say, CEO in bigger enterprises. They actually care about people. They might not know how to share it. So let's take simple example. They care about people so much that they avoid some difficult conversation because they think they are being people-centric, don't want to hurt someone. What happens is eventually the business will catch up, the business need revenue, profit, etc. And then they get pressure to deliver as founder, and them being nice to individuals who are not performing suddenly comes to a halt. And because they don't want to hurt somebody, the way they actually act hurts them because they didn't provide feedback up front so somebody can do something about it. They say it's all good, so it comes as a surprise for someone. So when 6 months later, when you're told you haven't been performing for 6 months, that immediately break trust. So I would say founders actually care about their people, but their behavior need to be more aligned and not let being nice be confused with doing the right thing for your people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Any other tips? I mean, that's sort of a big enough tip, isn't it, I guess?
That is a really important one because founders, I really think majority of the time does, but they avoid the hard conversation that actually is people-centric to give the power, the time, the autonomy for somebody to do something about what they need to grow or develop.
Okay, so founders might view HR as a bit of an add-on back office role. What can they do, founders first of all, to bring HR more into the conversation?
Actually, I would say founders do recognize that HR can add value, but for them it's a little bit like a black swan. They have heard of it, they have read about, amazing HR like in Netflix that can deliver business value, but they probably might not have experienced it themselves. So they do not know what to expect from HR leader.
And then throwing that question back to the HR team, often, they feel that they are part of the executive team, that they have a seat at the table, but there's no point in having a seat at the table if your voice isn't heard. Is it your experience that HR feel their voice isn't heard, and what can they do to make their voice louder?
So we fought actually for the table, our predecessor fought for a seat at the table for us, and we do have a physical seat at the table.
What do you mean by predecessor?
So HR in the previous, we never had a seat at the table. HR was a back office function. And our predecessor, HR leaders before us, the previous generation, fought for that seat. And we do have a physical seat. But still today, we will still hear HR leaders saying that we are still not being heard, or we are not able, or we struggle to influence business decision, and sometimes still seen as a back office function. And I would say there could be, coaching many HR leaders, I think there are two main reasons. And I think if changed, this will have a massive impact, but also it's one that is within our control. So HR leader, when they step up into a strategic role, number one, many times they don't realize the role has shifted, the expectation has shifted. And if they do, they don't know what that shift, what good looks like. Because unlike bigger organization where you have a manager or your leader who's able to coach you, you will now report to the founder, or you might report to the COO, who's probably in their biggest job in their life as well. So you might not you might not know what that shift look like, and you might not get the support to make that shift. But also, number two is even more important in my opinion, is we ourselves don't realize the extent of the value of our role and the impact. And what I mean by that was what I mentioned before. We see ourselves as HR leader rather than we are now accountable for HR department, what we're doing, rather than now being accountable for business results. Therefore, we are now business leader.
So a lot of our conversation has revolved around honesty, I suppose, in a way, being honest with yourself and kind of challenging yourself. For both founders and HR leaders, it's about asking difficult questions of themselves or others. It's difficult for us to do that, though, isn't it? As humans, we sort of shy away from confrontation. Well, apart from journalists, we love it. So what would your advice be to people to kind of get in the right mindset to sort of start having those difficult conversations and start sort of challenging the way that they think?
In all honesty, unless there is a reason why, we don't spend the time to challenge ourselves. So if you need to find a reason why, look at what is not working around. And if you want to change it, then start questioning ourselves what is not working.
So if you were going to say, you've got to sit down and have a difficult conversation to a founder, do you give them sort of a pep talk of how they go about doing that?
Oh, for HR leaders?
For either. I mean, let's take a founder, for instance. They've got to sort of sack somebody. They've got to, or they've got to have a difficult conversation with somebody about their sort of work, how they're working. How do you prepare them to have that tricky conversation?
Okay. My method is a bit unconventional.
Good.
Go straight to the point. The first thing, number one, I'll caveat this. You got to have a relationship with the person to have that conversation. And if you have that, because I will have the relationship, I'll build that first. So when the time comes when I need to have that conversation with the founder, I will say it's not you, it's not about you, it's about them. Because many times when they don't have that difficult conversation with employee, it's not about the employee, it's about them. Them not able to have the conversation, them feeling like they're going to hurt someone, them. So it's not you, it's the other person. So look from the other person's perspective. If you don't have the conversation now, what does it mean for them? Now, what does it mean for them 6 months' time if you don't have that conversation? So it's to shift the perspective of the person who's avoiding that conversation is looking too much inwards. Look at the other person, what they need.
Good point. Now, we've come to the end of our discussion, and I've thrown a lot of questions at you, but the very final question is about something that perhaps you haven't found the answer to yet. Is there a question going around your head, and it could be about HR, it could be about startups, it could be about something completely different, but just a question that you're still sort of searching for the answer for?
There are so many. There are so many. Which one? Why are we afraid to share our thoughts with others at different level? So for example, founders being worried about revenue and profit and being open about it so that the collective in the business can help to shape it. Why are we afraid to share that we are afraid to do X, whether it is, explore this product or, go into this market or so many things. Why are we afraid to share?
It's a great question, and I do think one we should all be asking ourselves, not just founders. JooBee, it's been absolutely lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me.
This has been the TechSpace Pod, a series by TechSpace, the workspace for change makers in tech. Thank you for listening today, and make sure to subscribe for new episodes. Visit techspace.co for full conversations and to find out more about our spaces, members, and upcoming events, from panel talks to gatherings inspired by conversations like this one. See you next time.